Why do you guys discourage demon users from diagramming LR sentences on paper? How do I improve my comprehension of following the logic of logical reasoning passages when it is convoluted? I noticed that for some questions you guys have diagrammed and others you don't. Why is that the case? Well, let's work backward here. Some of those videos are from a long time ago. So, but I think most of them have been removed by now.
Oh, if
I'm
you
not sure.
see, no, I mean, if let's be clear, if you see logical reasoning videos in the Demon where we're doing a lot of diagramming on the whiteboard, you can go ahead and flag that, hit the ask button, downvote that explanation, tell us that that's happening, because that's old school dogmatic shit that we used to do 10 years ago, 15 years ago when we were baby LSAT teachers. And we have learned over time that diagramming, it always takes time. It's very costly time-wise, which we don't care about that much, except for it also paradoxically causes people to make the very errors that they are allegedly trying to avoid by making the diagram. So things like confusing sufficient for necessary. I just can't tell you. We used to teach this diagramming way back. We used to teach this diagramming as a way of like, oh no, you need to get in there and diagram this formal logic so that you can really understand it. And then I just see like dozens after dozens after dozens of students who are trying, earnestly to do the diagramming, and then they end up fucking it up on the paper, and then they end up confusing sufficient for necessary or making some other logical error. It creates more of a problem than it ever solves, and it always costs time. So we've gone completely away from diagramming at all on logical reasoning.
Well, this person says I've had a hard time diagramming some sentences in my head. And I think the challenge here is that this person is still diagramming. They're just doing it mentally as opposed to on paper, right? And what we're saying is, no, you're actually thinking about this differently. You're comprehending what the conditional statement is saying.
Yeah.
On an intuitive level, which is a different way of thinking. It's not, oh, okay, I read the sentence and now I'm going to visualize in my head an arrow going from A to B or from B to C or whatever, right? It's like, no, you're going to read that sentence. You're going to understand what it really means. If it says, if you go to the store, then you're going to buy cheese, you're going to think in your head, you're like, wow, okay. So no matter what, when I show up at that grocery store, I have to buy cheese. Doesn't matter if the grocery store is on fire. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And if you can understand that and feel what that means, right? Feel that, oh, every time I show up at the grocery store, cheese is going to be bought by me.
Yeah.
Well, then you're in a much better position to deal with the other sentences that may or may not relate to that. And it's different from just thinking in your head, oh, if S, then C. Oh, I got that in my head. I didn't write it down, so I'm doing what Ben and Nathan have told me. I'm not diagramming. No, you're still diagramming. You're just not doing it on paper.
Yeah. You need to understand these premises, and you also need to recognize that only like not even half of the sentences on LR are going to be conditional. So, the second they say some or most, then that kind of formal logic diagramming breaks down. And the second they start talking about cause and effect, or the second they do anything other than offer you clear conditional premises, there's no point to doing that diagramming. So it's more trouble than it's worth. It will cause you to miss just as many questions or more questions as it's helping you to solve. It is very time consuming. For the people who can do that kind of diagramming correctly, I could make a pretty picture on the board and I could show you, formally, I could show you a solution to some of the questions on logical reasoning. But the people who are capable of doing that correctly on the board or on the page are also capable of just understanding it intuitively and working it through in your head, except faster. It's the type of thing where it's like you could show off as a, like go into fancy LSAT teacher mode to show off this diagramming. But in the moment when you're actually just trying to solve a question, it just doesn't actually help students solve questions. So that's why we don't teach it anymore.
One thing that I think you're kind of getting to, but I haven't heard it maybe explicitly, or I just want to make sure people understand this. The biggest problem I have with diagramming is when you take a sentence and you translate it from, if I go to the store, then I'm going to buy cheese. So if S, then C. That S and C, those two letters become symbols for everything that sentence is saying, right? And that works in a very simple sentence. If I say, if I go to the store, then I'm going to buy cheese, there's really not a lot of nuance there. And so maybe replacing those ideas with letters such as C and S can work. The problem is that a lot of sentences are much more nuanced than that. And people, as soon as they start diagramming, right, they go to the letter. That letter now symbolizes much more than just going to the store. And the right or wrong answer can play off of a change in that nuance, and you're totally unaware of it. And so I think that's a bit, and it's funny too, when people start diagramming and then they use one letter and they use S, and then they get confused and later think the S was not referring to store, but was referring to sandwich, because that came up somewhere later in that's one kind of confusion. But the other real confusion here is you're still talking about store, but they had specific things that they said about going to the store, like going to the store on Wednesday when it's cloudy outside. They don't capture that all in their variable.
Yeah.
And then they forget those details, and that makes a difference. So this is the takeaway that I hope that everyone got from this. One, don't diagram in logical reasoning. Instead, focus 100% on trying to intuitively get and understand the sentences that you're reading one at a time. That's your goal. The goal is so important, because even if you're not there today, you're heading in the right direction. If your goal is to diagram, then you're slowly going to get better at diagramming. It's a dead end road, right? Like it's not the best approach. And so if you have the wrong goal, then you're going to be practicing the wrong things and setting yourself up for failure.
I don't think it's going to even help you at all. But if it does help you, it's going to help you go from like 13 questions correct to like 15 questions correct. It's going to be arduous. It's going to take forever. It's not going to be fun. It's going to make the LSAT seem like work. And best case, you might improve by 1 or 2 questions, I think, in a section of logical reasoning.
Well, and this tactic is very specific for only a subset of questions. Right. Whereas the intuitive approach, as you get better
works
at
on every question.
Yeah, you're going to get better at the diagramming-esque questions and all the others at the same time.
I think that the diagramming is right. It's going to help you on maybe 2 questions on the section. And then on all the other questions, it's going to probably hurt you. So, I'm being very generous and saying, okay, if you learn this technique and you only deploy it on the 2 questions on the section where it might help you, which, by the way, how did you get that good? Man, that's like, which ones it's going to help you on. Okay.
I'm sure some people listening right now are like, oh, well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use this intuitive technique for all the others. Then I'm going to use diagramming for these 2. But I tell you, even then, only one of those 2 really works well, if at all, with diagramming. The other one is going to send you down a rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, there's so many questions where the first sentence seems like you should diagram it, and the second sentence seems like you should diagram it. And then the third and fourth sentences have nothing to do with conditionality and don't really relate to those previous sentences anyway. And it's like, turns out to be that the crux of the question has nothing to do with diagramming a whole thing.
Yeah. And the sentences aren't as hard as they sound when you actually just you're like, oh, all it's saying is that everybody who eats, frosted mini wheats,
you're making
cancer.
It harder by diagramming it. But again, being generous, let's say that it does help you on those 2 questions. The best case, you're going from 13 to 15. On the other hand, if you would really adopt our intuitive approach to attacking these arguments and really understanding it, the logical reasoning is going to start to seem fun. And you're going to go, instead of going from 13 to 15, you're going to go from 13 to 19 or 13 to 22. And it's like, that's what does it for us. Okay. And that's why we are able to get people 20 point, 25 point improvements, sometimes 30 point improvements on the LSAT. It does not come from bullshit technicalities. It comes from like really mastering and realizing how easy the LSAT is. And it's the only thing I care about. I'm not interested in getting our students incremental progress. I want to transform the way our students think about the LSAT.
Yeah.